In the early 20th century, the vast central plateau of New Zealand, stretching between the upper Waikato River and the Bay of Plenty, was widely regarded as barren pumice land, unsuitable for farming, and of little economic value. Yet it was precisely here that one of the most ambitious forestry experiments in modern history would unfold. Beginning in the 1920s, the New Zealand government committed itself to transforming this so-called wasteland into a permanent forest estate. What followed was not simply tree planting, but the deliberate creation of a new industrial future. Within a single generation, this land would become home to what was considered the largest man-made forest in the world, Kaingaroa. New Zealand's native forests were declining, and slow-growing species could no longer meet rising industrial demand. To secure a future timber supply, the government turned to Radiata pine, a fast-growing species that adapted exceptionally well to the region's pumice soils. Large-scale planting began in the 1920s, laying the foundation for a permanent, renewable forest estate. What began as a state-led planting program quickly evolved into a full-scale industrial enterprise. Private companies joined the effort, expanding infrastructure, mills, and processing facilities across the region. Within a single generation, trees planted in the 1920s were already being harvested, proving the remarkable speed and scale of the project. By the 1950s, labor shortages meant forestry could no longer rely on manpower alone. Mechanized logging became essential. Bulldozers, crawler tractors, winches, and heavy trucks replaced earlier methods. This was not random cutting. Harvesting was carefully planned in blocks, ensuring sustained yield and rotation cycles. The scale was immense. Kaingaroa alone covered hundreds of thousands of acres, divided by nearly 800 miles of roads to allow access for logging, thinning, and fire protection. Growth rates were extraordinary, approaching 880,000 cubic feet of timber per day. Logs arriving from the forest were graded by size and quality. The best were directed to sawmills for structural timber and building materials. But nothing was wasted. Offcuts and slabs were chipped for pulp production. Bark and smaller residues became boiler fuel. This philosophy of maximum recovery reflected a central policy. Every part of the tree must contribute to national productivity. The sawmill was no longer just a cutting facility, it was part of an integrated industrial chain. Perhaps the most dramatic symbol of this transformation was the Kinleith Pulp and Paper Mill, opened in the early 1950s. This vast modern complex converted pine logs into pulp, packaging paper, and newsprint. The mechanical process was relentless. Logs were debarked, reduced to chips, cooked in massive digesters to separate fibers from lignin, then washed, pressed, dried, and wound into finished paper at speeds exceeding 1,000 feet per minute. For the first time, New Zealand could produce its own wrapping and packaging papers at industrial scale, reducing dependence on imports. Forestry was no longer just about trees, it was reshaping geography. The Marupara Working Plan of 1949 laid the groundwork for long-term timber sales over 23 million cubic feet annually to the Tasman Pulp and Paper Company. New towns were built. Rail lines were extended to the coast. A deep-water port at Mount Maunganui expanded to handle export shipments. This was state planning on a grand scale. Forest, factory, rail, and port integrated into one economic strategy. Unlike extractive industries, this project was built on renewal. For every tree harvested, several seedlings were planted. Periodic thinning allowed stronger specimens to develop into high-quality timber. Natural regeneration was assisted where possible. Artificial planting filled the gaps where it was not. The objective was permanence, an industrial forest that would outlive those who first planted it. Historically, New Zealand's economy had relied heavily on agriculture and fluctuating world prices for wool, meat, and dairy. The forestry program offered diversification. Timber, pulp, and paper exports added stability. Industrial towns emerged where none had existed. What had once been dismissed as useless land became a cornerstone of national development. In just a few decades, a government experiment reshaped an entire region. The forests of Kaingaroa were not an accident of nature, but the result of planning, engineering, and sustained human effort. They stand as one of the most ambitious examples of state-led industrial forestry in the 20th century. If you're fascinated by how nations built industries from the ground up through vision, labor, and long-term planning, subscribe and follow along. There are many more stories where land, machines, and people reshaped the modern world.